If we could define Red Bull's current situation in one word, it would definitely be a crisis. It's not just that they currently look like a mid-table team with the results they're getting in these first 3 races of the season, but also, since that year 2023 when they won almost everything, the team has done nothing but fall apart. Piece by piece, foundation by foundation. And what remains of what it once was? A team that, in the words of one of its former members, had an organization built to dominate Formula One for 10 years today. It seems that only the ashes remain of what it once was. One of the most relentless teams seen in recent years within Formula One. And this is not an exaggeration because since 2023, the team has been experiencing an internal exodus of talent where its biggest figures, one by one, have left the team for different reasons. Engineers, drivers, marketing staff, in short, a long list of personnel have ended up leaving the energy drink team's structure, and those are teams that have been abandoned. And today, we will review all those talents who have left the energy drink team, their reasons, and the consequences this has brought to the team, and a full-scale talent exodus narrated in chronological order in what has been the dismantling of a team that was meant to dominate. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the chronology of the dismantling of Red Bull Racing. As always, before reviewing the list of talents who left the team, it's important to provide some background to understand Red Bull Racing's current situation. And in 2022 and 2023, the energy drink brand, with the arrival of the ground effect technical regulations, saw one of the most dominant stretches ever seen in the history of Formula One. Well, the Red Bull team, with Max Verstappen and Checo Perez as drivers, Verstappen being the spearhead of the project, along with an outstanding technical department and some bold moves, managed to achieve an overwhelming string of successes. They won 17 out of the 22 races in the season, and in 2023, the RB19 managed to win 22 out of the 23 races that year, which obviously meant the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships for those 2 seasons, and that the RB19, with all the success it achieved in 2023, would set records for Red Bull, like being the team that scored the most points in a single season, the car with the most wins in a single season, becoming the most outstanding car in the history of Formula One. Verstappen also achieved the record for most consecutive wins in a single season and most wins by a driver in a single year that season. And for the first time in his life, Red Bull Racing managed to secure a 1-2 in the Drivers' Championship and a long list of other records that Red Bull broke in 2023. And this made people think that the energy drink team was about to establish an overwhelming dominance like the one we saw in the Mercedes era from 2014 to 2020. No obstante, desde ese mismo 2020, the team began to suffer a talent drain that, as of 2026, still hasn't ended. A drain caused by staff who have pursued new opportunities, but also by staff who have been caught up in an internal war within the team. Discontent within the organization, lack of leadership, and countless problems that Red Bull has suffered since 2023 that have caused. Not only have all the foundations that built this team's success disappeared, but 3 years after that overwhelming and dominant season, what was once a dominant team now seems more like a mid-table team. Well, from 2023 until now, they managed to defend Max Verstappen's driver's title in the 2024 season, but they couldn't do it again. With the constructors' crowns they lost in 2024 and 2025. In addition, that same year, they lost the driver's world title to McLaren. But that's not the serious part of this situation. The real issue is that since 2023, Red Bull has lost more than 10 key figures and a lot of staff have ended up leaving the team for different reasons. And in this list that we're going to show you today, there are more than 15 people who have left the team. So the time has come in this video to explain to you who has jumped ship from Red Bull, their reasons, and where they ended up, as well as how much damage they caused to the Red Bull team with their departures from that moment on. Rob Marshall was the first major departure that the Red Bull team had in 2023. Marshall is a British engineer who was involved with the Red Bull Racing team since 2006, working directly with Adrian Newey, and his position within the Red Bull team was head of design, where Marshall was a key part of the structure since the cars he worked on allowed Sebastian Vettel to win the World Championships in the 2010, 2011, 2012 and 2013 seasons and within the paddock. He was always recognized for his talent and contributions. And he was always seen as one of the main people responsible for all the victories that the energy drink brand achieved. But probably, working within this structure, he was always overshadowed by Adrian Newey, who in the eyes of the public received most of the credit for the successes this team achieved in terms of the car's performance. And this was the first and one of the key figures to leave the team, but probably one of the few who didn't leave because of internal problems, since between 2021 and 2023, Marshall began to feel that his time at Red Bull made him feel stuck. Those were years when Rob Marshall thought that if he stayed at Red Bull, he would remain there forever without being able to progress and without a new challenge to push him. And not wanting to get stuck and fall into a negative spiral, Marshall ended up accepting the offer from the McLaren team to join them starting January 1st, 2024, where the engineer currently holds the position of chief designer in the McLaren team, and where he is recognized as one of the most critical parts of the resurgence that the British team has experienced since 2023, and which has allowed them, since 2024 and 2025, to win 2 Constructors' Championships and 1 more Drivers' Championship. Marshall's departure was unrelated to any misunderstanding with the Red Bull team, nor was it like what happened later when the rest of the staff gradually left the organization. But it was definitely a significant loss, where Rob went on to shine at another team that is currently having much more success than Red Bull is achieving. Adrian Newey needs no introduction, as we're talking about one of the greatest engineers and aerodynamicists in the history of Formula One. And with Red Bull, he was a key figure, not only for making this team a Grand Prix winner, but also for all the successes they achieved from the 2010 season up to the 2024 season. Newey and Rob Marshall were foundational members who witnessed the team's competitive rise and were key figures in Red Bull Racing's technical department. However, at the beginning of 2024, the news broke that became the bombshell in the paddock that season. Because in April, the most successful and prestigious engineer in the history of Formula One announced that he would be leaving the Red Bull team at the end of 2024, leaving a huge gap to fill within the energy drink team's structure. The official reason that Adrian Newey gave for leaving this team was, in his own words, a hunger for new challenges. Newey felt unmotivated and thought leaving Red Bull for a new team would help him escape stagnation and find a challenge that would inspire him to fully use his talent as a designer. However, let's also remember that at the beginning of 2024 is when the internal war within Red Bull Racing took place, and the moment when Helmut Marko, Christian Horner, the Verstappens, and the owners of Red Bull Racing started a fight, as a result of the accusations that arose around the sexual scandal surrounding Christian Horner. And it is said, according to some sources, that Horner was starting to think about the future of the team with someone who was already over 60 years old, and that Horner began working with other people whom Adrian Newey himself did not like. Horner wanted this new staff to start working and contribute their ideas, and Adrian Newey opposed all of this, leading to a conflict with the CEO and team principal at that time, Christian Horner. And this makes sense with certain rumors that have come up recently, since the destination of the prestigious and award-winning engineer was Aston Martin Racing, who in the end ended up acquiring his services, and he joined the team in 2025. But as a result of the recent crisis that the British team is experiencing, the rumors started to spread that Loro Ancestral was considering Christian Horner to lead the team as team principal and CEO of the organization. But it was Adrian Newey himself who ended up blocking that option, since he didn't want to work with Christian again, which makes sense in light of the rumors that he left the project because of disagreements with a former colleague at the team. Either way, Red Bull lost one of the most important members of their technical department. And many people point out that from the moment Newey left, that's exactly when this organization started to completely lose all direction in car development. And that allowed McLaren to take the Constructors' titles in 2024 and 2025 plus the last Drivers' Championship. Regardless, his departure caused significant damage. Because it's true that, except for that resurgence they had starting from last year's Italian Grand Prix, this team has had more setbacks in their technical department than strengths. That support the idea that allowing his departure was a good idea. And that ended with another of the pillars of Red Bull's success out of the team, and who has been an important part of the dismantling that this structure has suffered since 2023. Jonathan Wheatley was another of the pillars who joined the team as part of that wave of talent in 2006, and since then he has held the position of sporting director and team manager of the Austrian structure. Under his leadership, Red Bull achieved 7 drivers' titles and 6 constructors' titles, and he was also a key figure in the direction and leadership of the team, quick decision-making, management, and the way he organized the team. It was always one of Jonathan Wheatley's greatest virtues, which is why he was considered another of the great pillars of this organization and a key to its success. However, when the internal war broke out at the beginning of 2024 and they were after Christian Horner's head, the faction that sided with Helmut, Marko intended to replace Horner as team principal and give that position to Jonathan Wheatley. And if Horner's faction had ended up losing that battle, his position probably would have been taken over by Wheatley. But in the end, this didn't happen, because at least at the beginning of 2024, Horner remained in his position as CEO and team principal, which meant that Jonathan Wheatley basically stayed in the same place. And after this, it didn't take many months for the Brit to announce his departure from the team, heading to the Sauber organization, which would become the official Audi team starting from the 2026 season. So, given the background and all the rumors that were mentioned, it wouldn't be surprising if, in the end, after losing the chance to become team principal, instead of getting into another conflict or having problems with Christian Horner, he decided to step aside and go for a new project like the one offered by the people at Sauber. And during 2024 and 2025, his departure became impossible to ignore. It was clear that Red Bull lost a lot of its leadership capacity, and decision-making started to become quite poor after the departure of this fundamental pillar, being a possible victim of the internal war within Red Bull, and a very significant loss that the energy drink brand had to deal with in 2024. This is a story that probably everyone knows. Sergio Checo Perez joined the team in 2021 to replace Alexander Albon and become a full-time driver for this organization. Checo Perez was a key player in what turned out to be Max Verstappen's first championship in 2021, and he was present throughout the golden era of this team. He helped win the Constructors' Championship in 2022 and 2023, and also achieved the runner-up position in the World Championship in the aforementioned year. However, despite the Mexican driver's collaboration with the team and the contributions he made, at the end of 2024, and despite having a contract with the team to race in 2025, he ended up being relieved of his position in what was a rather strange situation, because throughout all of 2024, due to the discomfort that Checo Perez felt with the car, which later affected drivers like Liam Lawson and Yuki Tsunoda, there were several rumors throughout the season about the possible replacement of the Mexican driver. In the end, this did not happen, and in the middle of 2024, Checo had his contract renewed to race in 2025. But at the end of 2024, Red Bull's internal leadership made the decision that, despite having renewed his contract months earlier, they ended up terminating his contract by mutual agreement, so that his place would be taken by the academy driver Liam Lawson, and he would end up leaving Formula One. His departure was directly linked to Christian Horner, as it is said that he needed a scapegoat after losing the Constructors' Championship and after the whole scandal surrounding the 2024 season. And that scapegoat ended up being Checo Perez, and that explains the strange moves around his renewal and the Mexican driver's later departure without even starting his contract. A move that didn't work out at all for Christian Horner, because the following year, Liam Lawson and Yuki Tsunoda exposed the serious problems that existed around the team's second seat, Red Bull Racing, and especially with the single-seater, which was so difficult to drive that in the end were key to what ended up being the downfall of his leadership at Red Bull. Horner was probably the departure that most surprised the grid in 2025. It's no secret that he was caught up in a power struggle between himself and Helmut Marko. And although he managed to survive both that conflict and the sexual scandal he had at the beginning of 2024, he started to be blamed for many of the decisions that were being made. Red Bull lost its dominance, costing them the Constructors' Championship that year. In addition, in 2025, by the middle of that season, this team looked completely lost and resigned to losing everything. Besides the McLaren team, Horner was the leader of this organization since 2005 when they arrived in Formula One. And he was practically the first major move Red Bull made so that, in the end, it would become a team that won Grand Prix races and World Championships. For 20 years, he was the leader of Red Bull Racing until, after the death of Red Bull's founder, Dietrich Mateschitz, it is said that Christian Horner wanted to amass even more power within the team, and this was partly what ended up triggering the conflict he had with Helmut Marko, al querer también tener el liderazgo del programa de jóvenes talentos. Later, during the internal war, he also had a fight with Max Verstappen's father, and there are rumors that say Max made his stay on the team conditional on Horner leaving, and in the end, that's what ended up happening. What about the new management of Red Bull? Will the Thai owners and the leadership under sports director Oliver Minzlav end up making a move? And after blaming him for the team's decline in 2025, they will end up firing him after 20 years leading the energy drink operation, letting him go in July 2025. He was blamed for the team's most questionable decisions, like firing Checo Perez after first renewing his contract, which meant paying a huge compensation to the Mexican driver without him having raced a single race in 2025, and the departure of other key members of the team. And above all, that his leadership was destroying Red Bull, which had absolutely dominated everything in 2023. So in the end, despite having kept his position last year, he ended up losing the internal struggle, which continued more quietly. In 2025, he was removed from the position he had basically built with the Red Bull team when they arrived in Formula 1 in 2005, and his position was taken by Lauren Mekies. And currently, even though there is talk about Horner returning to Formula 1 with some teams, for now he remains out of Formula 1. But he was one of the people who left the team in the most controversial way and another important pillar of that successful structure. After Christian Horner left, two of his loyal members from the marketing and communications group also ended up leaving the team, as was the case with Oliver Hughes and Paul Smith, who left the team almost immediately after the team principal's departure. And in that 2025, more team members ended up leaving, such as the engineers Michael Manning, David Marth, and Tom Hart, who worked in operations around the Red Bull cars. But without a doubt, the last major departure the team had in 2025 ended up being Helmut Marko, who was the sporting advisor for both Red Bull and the Racing Bulls team. He was also in charge of directing the young driver development program, which must be acknowledged. He was responsible for bringing talents like Sebastian Vettel, Daniel Ricciardo, and Max Verstappen to the main team. Marko led the Young Talent Academy practically since 1999, but with the arrival of the team in 2005, his position was reaffirmed and he became another key piece and pillar within the structure. However, his position was always very controversial, as he was known for being ruthless in his Young Talent Academy. He made very inappropriate comments, and he was responsible for the internal power struggle that took place within the team in 2024. In fact, Helmut Marko is accused of organizing and leaking all the information related to Christian Horner's sexual scandal case to the media as a way of putting pressure when Red Bull itself cleared the former team principal. He was investigated for this, although he avoided a possible suspension. And despite technically having won the internal struggle when Horner was fired in mid-2025 in the end, he still couldn't avoid Red Bull eventually sending him into retirement. At the end of that year, he paid the price for replacing Checo Perez with Liam Lawson and Yuki Tsunoda. He had to address his accusations against Kimi Antonelli, claiming Antonelli let Lando Norris pass during the Qatar Grand Prix. These claims sparked a wave of hate toward the Italian driver and even affected Antonelli personally.
Max Verstappen tuvo que salir a decir que Anton
let his rival for the title pass to help him in his fight for the championship. In addition, he was also accused of bypassing Red Bull itself to sign McLaren Academy and Formula 2 driver Alex Dunn, and of promoting Arvid Lindblad to Racing Bulls for 2026 without having the consensus of the entire management. All of this led Red Bull to decide to retire Helmut Marko, and with this, he ended up leaving the team at the end of 2025, being another pillar who ended up leaving Red Bull, and with him, one of the most important figures also left.
polémicas, pero también una de las piezas.
Key figures, along with Horner, in what was the entire internal war that ended up destroying the team and leaving it practically unrecognizable. Will Courtney is another one of those members who joined the team in 2005 and was part of the Red Bull Racing Strategy Department, where he shared tasks with the strategist Hans Smith. However, in 2024, it was announced that he would leave the Red Bull team to take a new position within the McLaren team as sporting director. So Courtney remained in the organization until 2025, and after entering a gardening leave period, ended up joining the McLaren team at the beginning of 2026. This was another significant loss of a staff member who had been with Red Bull during the season, only to become part of the rival team that took the crown from them in 2025. It is not known that Courtney left due to internal issues. Rather, it is understood he wanted to pursue this opportunity when the position opened. Although they are not engineers, in 2026 we had a round of departures at the beginning of the year from Red Bull's PR and marketing staff. Departures that took many by surprise, such as the departure of Joanna Fleet, the Human Resources Director, and also the departure of the Sponsorship Director, Julia George. Another one who joined this group of departures was the Marketing Director, Simon Smith-Wright, and a well-known one, the Communications Staff member, Alice Hedward. Their departures are linked to Red Bull's recent cleanup of staff from the Christian Horner and Helmut Marko eras. However, 2026 would also bring another significant loss, as we started the year with the announcement of the departure of the head of design, Craig Skinner. a departure that took effect immediately of another key member who had been working with the Red Bull team for 20 years and announced his exit in February of this same year. And according to rumors, his departure from Red Bull was due to clashes and problems he had with the current technical director of the team, Pierre Gaucher, as it is said that the decisions Craig wanted to make regarding the RB22 were completely wrong. Something that created tension since supposedly Gaucher intended to look for a new identity for Red Bull. This was meant to move completely away from the car designs Adrian Newey had created, while Gaucher completely ignored those ideas. Craig caused tensions that led to the departure of the chief designer of this team at the beginning of 2026 in what was another exit due to internal problems. And the last major departure of 2026, and the most recent one from Red Bull so far, was by one of the most important figures within the organization, none other than Jean-Pierre Lambiase. The Briton is known for many things, including being the race engineer for Max Verstappen, a partnership that was highly successful for both of them. Lambiase joined the Red Bull team in 2015 to be the race engineer for Daniel Kvyat, and when he was replaced by Max Verstappen, he ended up staying on as the Dutch driver's race engineer. The two of them formed a very special bond that allowed Max to have a firm and tough yet very productive race engineer like Jean-Pierre. On top of that, this partnership with one of the best drivers on the grid helped deliver 4 drivers' world championships between 2021 and 2024. However, since 2022, Lambiase has combined his work as Max Verstappen's personal engineer with the role of race chief for the Red Bull racing team, and after Jonathan Wheatley's departure, he began to take on more responsibilities within the Red Bull team, which he combined with his role as Max's race engineer. And he was one of the few key pieces that Red Bull still had left from that glorious era between 2021 and 2023. Well, in April, he announced his departure from the team to join the McLaren team starting in 2028. So he will actually remain active with the Red Bull team in 2026 and 2027 and then later become the race director for the McLaren team, leaving his responsibilities with Red Bull, but most importantly, stepping down as Max Verstappen's race engineer, a role that brought so much success to both of them in particular. His departure, unlike the others, doesn't seem to be related to internal problems with the team. According to rumors, what actually happened is that McLaren made him an astronomical offer financially speaking, one of those offers that are impossible to refuse. Faced with this offer and growth opportunity, Lambiase didn't want to miss out and accepted McLaren's offer, leaving the successful team structure he helped build. Since his arrival in 2015 being one of the last key members of that dominant 2023 team, he will leave the organization in 2028, but without a doubt, this is another significant loss for a team that continues to be stripped down. These are broadly speaking the departures that Red Bull has had since that 2023 season, which, as you can see, are actually quite a few. But on top of all this, we also have to add the uncertainty surrounding 2 particular members who are still at Red Bull at this moment. Pierre Gaucher, the team's technical director, is at risk of losing his job as he is blamed for the team's poor competitiveness. Red Bull, not just in 2026 but for several years now, since the problems Red Bull has had with their cars are being directly linked to him. This really makes him partly responsible for losing their dominant position from one season to the next. His position is currently under a lot of scrutiny, and if the team's competitiveness doesn't improve, he could be another departure that happens at the end of this year. And especially uncertainty around the future of Max Verstappen, because even though he has a contract until the end of 2028, it's known that he has a clause in which if, by the middle of 2026, if he is not at least in second place in the drivers' standings, which is very difficult and unlikely to happen, he would have the freedom to change teams or leave Formula One. He has repeatedly threatened to retire, saying he dislikes these technical regulations, isn't comfortable driving these cars, and is seriously considering quitting, knowing much of the successful team has left, that he might lose his key colleague Lambiase, and that Red Bull currently lacks a competitive car. Besides the fact that he doesn't like the technical regulations for 2026, we could be facing the possibility that he might leave.
Equipo o abandone la Fórmula 1 directamente si así.
With this, Red Bull would lose its last great stronghold left from an already weakened and very stripped down structure that barely resembles what existed in that dominant golden era. In conclusion, and to summarize, as you can see, quite a few Red Bull members have ended up leaving, but it's striking that a large part of them have left due to internal conflicts or disagreements within Red Bull's top management. Few figures have left the team simply to seek new challenges, but did so on good terms. Meanwhile, figures like Helmut Marko, Christian Horner, Craig Skinner, Adrian Newey, Jonathan Wheatley, in one way or another, have been involved in internal tensions, who in one way or another have been victims of that internal war, and whose departure from the team has been caused by it in one way or another. And as the fire started to burn within the Red Bull structure, it made the other teams smell blood and begin to absorb some of these talented people. And among so many internal situations and better offers that have been coming from other teams, that's how Red Bull was left completely gutted and lost all its pillars of success. In addition to most of its top figures, who were the key to the competitive birth of this team in 2009, but also to members of that group.
Época dorada entre 2021 y 2023.
The consequence of that power struggle that happened in 2024 is one that Red Bull is still paying for to this day, in what was a war that left no winners and simply meant the slow death of a team that had everything to dominate Formula One. But today, not only does it look more like a midfield team, but it is also very far from the extremely high level it once had, which could have lasted if it hadn't been for the interests of a few who ended up affecting it.
A un equipo con un enorme potencial.
But without a doubt, if nothing strange starts to change in the coming months, we are looking at a team that seems terminally ill, and that, from being the king of the grid, is now just a structure fighting not to lose its competitive position.